Chris, it's wonderful to have you in the
Because
show. For
one
our
of the challenges that I see, I'm going to throw in right from the beginning, is that often people think application security and they think tools important. So OWASP Top 10 is no longer created based on a bunch of application security people getting together and saying, I think this one is important and I feel like that one's important. It's all data driven. The point here is that we need a standard process, a way to standardize how we secure the things that we build. I jokingly say I had a love relationship with Stride as a methodology. And if somebody doesn't have a plan, it's just chaos. So we're going to make a plan while we're in the midst, in the fire. I don't see generative AI replacing anything other than the most menial of jobs.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into season 2 of Scale to Zero show. I'm Purushottam, co-founder and CTO of Cloudanix. Today's episode is focused on application security and threat modeling. To share his knowledge on this topic, we have Chris Romeo with us today. Chris is a leading voice and thinker in application security, threat modeling, and security champions. He's the host of a few award-winning podcasts like Application Security Podcast, the Security Table, and the Threat Modeling Podcast. He has over 25 years of security experience, holding positions across a gamut of like application security, security engineering, incident response, and various executive roles. Chris also holds the CISSP and CSSLP certifications as well. He founded Security Journey, leading to an exit in 2022. Was the chief security advocate at Cisco, spreading security knowledge through education and championship programs. Currently, he serves as the CEO of Care Ventures, an early stage cybersecurity investment and incubation firm. Chris, it's wonderful to have you in the show. For our viewers who may not know you, do you want to briefly share about your journey?
Yeah, happy to. As you read in my bio, I've been involved in the world of security for 25 plus years. And so I've seen a lot of different things. Like security was very different when I started. We went from people saying, we don't need to do that. The security thing, we don't need to do that, to where we are today, where people are like, okay, security, it makes sense. But I started as a sysadmin, and I was very blessed in that I started in a company that had this idea of growing security engineers back in the 1990s. And so I became a security engineer, and that led me down the path of being a security consultant, of being a director of incident response, of doing some things with managed security services, and then eventually finding my way to Cisco, where application security became my passion, and then ultimately starting my own company, Security Journey, and selling it. And so that gives you a little bit of context about the journey that I've been on, from starting as a system administrator, really knowing nothing about security, to going through a almost a lifetime career in this field of security.
So I'm looking forward to learn some of or some of the challenges that you have faced and how you have addressed and your knowledge around it, right? Uh, so the way we do the podcast is we have two sections. The first section focuses on security questions, and second section is mostly around security practices and rating the practices as well. So let's start with the security questions. So throughout your career, you must have seen that applications are getting deployed in many ways, right? In-house, data centers, clouds, edge, connected devices, and there are many more, right? And with these different ways of deploying applications, there are more entry points or touch points which make applications vulnerable to security threats or breaches, right? One of the goals of application security is to focus on identifying and minimizing these vulnerabilities. So, my question is, how do various components of application securities work together to identify and minimize security vulnerabilities when you have to deploy across so many ways, right? So many ways you can deploy your applications.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm gonna take you up to the 20,000 meter, 50,000 foot view to talk about application security, because one of the challenges that I see, I'm going to throw in right from the beginning, is that often people think application security and they think tools. And that's the end of the conversation for them. They think AppSec is just, I take these tools, I incorporate them, I work with the results. And from my perspective, in my viewpoint, let's step up a level and think about what application security really is. Application security is people, process, tools. So tools are a piece of this. They're a pillar. They're a leg of this table, and governance. And so if we work through each of these and think about how they come together. So on the people side, so application security requires
Mhm.
developers. Developers are writing code. We want developers to write more secure code. So we need people that write code, but that write
Mhm.
secure code. And people by default don't write secure code. In our university systems, we're not teaching them how to write secure web applications that avoid SQL injection or
Right.
cross-site scripting or all these different types of attacks that we have in the OWASP top 10. And so people, that's the first leg of the table here. Process. We have to have a repeatable way to ensure that everything we build goes through the same set of controls, same set of security steps to ensure we have the most secure and private product that we can put out when we get to the end of the life cycle. And so for process, we're talking about secure development life cycle. These are the steps. Microsoft invented this thing 20 years ago or so now of security requirements, threat modeling, security testing, code review, all these different pieces. But the point here is that we need a standard process, a way to standardize how we secure the
Mhm.
things that we build. And then tools, yeah, tools are a big piece of this. We need tools to make the people
Mhm.
more efficient. Tools can help us to put the process to enact the different pieces of the process. And in application security, we have so many different 4-letter acronyms for tools. You have SAST and DAST and SCO. That's only 3. RASP and IAST and CWPP
Mhm.
for the container or whatever protection. And so there's all these different types of tooling. But so they're important, but they're only one leg of the table. They're not the leg of the table. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention governance as the final piece. And I learned this from Alyssa Miller, who I was interviewing on the Application Security podcast. And Alyssa, she's the one who gave me this idea about governance being such an important leg of this table. Because when you're thinking about rolling out an application security effort across an entire company, you have to have a way, once you get to a certain maturity, you have to start measuring, are the people learning the things they need to know about security? Are they following the process? Are they using the tools and fixing the
Mhm.
things that come out of it? That's governance. That means dashboards and metrics and traceability and tracking what's happening. And so for me, that's application security. Application security is not a static analysis tool. Static analysis tool is a piece of this bigger infrastructure of application security. And I think all too often people are focused on the tooling. Let's think about all these different legs of the table working together.
I love your answer because most folks, you're spot on that most folks think that, hey, we have a security problem, let's get a tool and we are all set. But they often miss out on the other three legs, right? So thank you for highlighting that. So now my follow-up question is, let's say we have all the four legs set up. Now, when the organization discovers vulnerabilities, what mistakes do you see people make most often?
There's yes, that's a bit of a loaded question because there's a lot of different types of mistakes. But you
Hmm.
said most often, so let me cage this answer in the perspective
Hmm.
of most often. And so I would say that the OWASP Top 10, first of all, is a great place to go to see the top 10 application security risks, or what are the most likely things that have been found over the last number of years
Hmm.
according to data. And I say the according to data part's important. So OWASP Top 10 is no longer created based on a bunch of application security people getting together and saying, I think this one is important and I feel like that one's important. It's
Hmm.
all data driven. For the most part, it's data driven now. And so the OWASP top 10, that is our list of types of issues and things that we have to consider. Um, I would say other challenges that I've seen, if we're going to put these into categories, one of the big challenges that people are facing right now, as we've seen in the news media and whatnot, is a lack of protection for CI/CD pipelines. Okay, your CI/CD pipeline, your build process, that's part of your application security strategy. You have to protect the tools you use to build the software, or you end up with attackers getting into the build systems. And if I'm in the build system as an attacker, I can do whatever I want. I can add stuff to your application. I can add libraries. I can. There are so many different ways to
Hmm.
pollute a build. And then I would say the third thing right now is everybody's talking about the software supply chain, but I'm going to throw it out again because that's one of our biggest issues, right? Is we have vulnerabilities, and it's not even the vulnerabilities in the first level dependencies. It's this idea of transitive dependencies. And so Sonatype has this state of the software
Hmm.
supply chain report. I don't work for Sonatype, but Sonatype's got this report. I recommend people go check it out because every year when it comes out, I grab that report because I want to know how many people are still downloading vulnerable components and including them in their packages. What are the challenges from the supply chain? And so those are some of the bigger issues that I've seen in the last thinking about the last year or two in the
Hmm.
realm of
So you
application.
covered a lot actually as part of your answer. Like OWASP top 10, there are 10 highly vulnerable issues, right? That is highlighted. And again, as you said, like it's data driven. It's not just few security folks just get into a room and then start dreaming and just writing it down, right? So it's more data driven. So it makes
Yep.
sense for organizations to pay attention to it and focus on it. One of the things that you highlighted as part of the security legs, right, is the process. And when it comes to software development, most folks are familiar with the SDLC model, right, which is the effective and time efficient process of designing and building high quality software. Now, my question is, how soon
Yep.
do you think, let's say, threat modeling should be included as part of the software development lifecycle?
There's kind of two there's two answers to this question. There's kind of the what I would say is what I wish happened and what really happens in the real world. Okay, so I'm a realist. I believe that there we can set standards for what we hope is going to happen, but there also when we get into working in development organizations, it's not going to happen that cleanly as we hope. So the threat modeling purist in me is going to say, I want threat modeling to be occurring at when somebody has an
Hmm.
idea for building a new feature. A developer grabs a user story, for example. Let's say in an agile or DevOps world, they grab a user story from their whatever tool
Hmm.
they use to keep it, and they're starting to think
Hmm.
about the design. That's where I want them to do threat modeling before they've ever written any code, written any lines of
So
code.
even in design
I want
phase,
them to
in
be
a way.
considering. Definitely. I mean, and you think about it though, like in an agile world, in a DevOps world, design phase has been crunched down to be a short period of time from the time the developer
Hmm.
grabs that user story. Either if in the old days they would have them as sticky notes on the wall, and you'd grab a sticky note and
Hmm.
go work on it. Right? We do it all virtually now, but the design phase really happens from the time they grab that user story until
Hmm.
they start coding it. That's the design phase. So there are multiple mini design phases occurring in an agile
Hmm.
sprint, for example. So the purist in me says I really want threat modeling to happen there. That's my goal. Now, let's look at the other side of the coin. The realist in me knows that when an organization is starting to do threat modeling, they have lots of code already deployed. They can't just delete all their code and say let's just start from scratch. We're going to delete the entire application and we're going to start from scratch to
Hmm.
ensure we threat model. And so you're going to have to figure out how to integrate threat modeling into wherever the various code that's already been built is going to have to be retrofitted. It's going to have to be have threat
Hmm.
models performed against features that are already deployed in production. And so you really have that balance between the purest view of let's threat model new stuff to ensure we don't get
Hmm.
further behind, but then also the realist saying, hey, there's a bunch of stuff in production we have to go back and perform threat modeling upon. And so it's really it's both sides of the coin is really it's early and it's catching up with everything that we've already
So
built.
I like how you differentiated being the purist and the realist, right? So where is the gap? Like, why are organizations not able to get close to what you said should be the best case, right? That maybe we start very early and we do it in every phase. So where do you see the gap, and how can that be mitigated in a way?
Well, the gap is just a result of they didn't start threat modeling when they started the company. And so the gap exists because they're bolting on security concepts or process related pieces after they've already started building something. So it's not their fault. They didn't know any better. They didn't know 10 years ago when they started the company that they should start
Hmm.
threat modeling. And so that's why the gap exists. And I think the way that we close the gap on anything in related to application security is to integrate the different pieces that I
Hmm.
talked about, people, process, tools, governance, into existing applications, knowing that we're not going to be able to fix this in
Hmm.
a week. You can't just turn this thing on and say, okay, we're doing application security now. If you turn on a SaaS tool for a product that's never been scanned before, you're going to get hundreds or thousands of results. You're going to bury developers in just noise and false
Right.
positives. And so you really have to approach those things that are already in production. You have to really come into those and use a more careful and slower approach to bringing the AppSec pieces into it, because the worst thing you can do is turn on a tool, generate 1,000 results that generate 1,000 tickets in Jira, and they all get assigned to a developer. What does that developer think about security at that moment? They think, these people are morons. They just generated 1,000 tickets that I can't. There's no way I could fix these. This 1,000 tickets would take me half a year to resolve as a developer. And so by carefully leading how we bring application security into existing products, existing applications, we can ensure that the developer gets value. And if the developer gets value from the first tool that provides output to them, you know how the developer will then answer, it wasn't so
Hmm.
bad. The security people added this stuff. It wasn't so bad. That's a compliment from a
Right.
developer. Like, it's not so bad. That's them saying, this is awesome. We love it. Like, this is the equivalent of a salesperson saying, this is the best thing that's ever been created on earth. Right, translating from engineer to salesperson. But so you just got to be careful. You got to be careful that you're going to properly introduce application security, so you don't create something that's going to be tough for people to really grab a hold of and be a part of. You want them on board. You want all the developers to be excited about security, not figuring out how they're going to get around it or figuring out how they're going to fight you
Hmm.
about it.
Yeah, I see how you connected this to your earlier response, right? You cannot just switch on a tool and you're like, yeah, we have security in place, and you sort of bombard your developers with tons of issues that they need to address, rather put all the pieces together, process and your governance, everything together, and then use the tool as a way to improve your security posture in a way, right? So that makes a lot of sense. So, if, I want to dig a little deeper on the threat modeling, right? So, when it comes to, let's say, threat modeling, there are many models like Stride, there is MITRE ATT&CK, OWASP Top 10. You already spoke about that. And with each of them, there are different pros and cons as well. Let's say you do not have a lot of budget to have a security expert in your team.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to understand what's the right model, what's the right way to implement. How should teams tackle this?
I'm a big fan of the methodology that's referred to as Stride. And so I'll tell you a little story about my history with Stride. Just so folks, in case folks don't know, they're listening. Stride is spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, elevation of privilege. It's a simple to me. I shouldn't say it's a simple. It's a mnemonic that helps us to
Mhm.
think about some categories of threats when we're first getting started with threat modeling. And so I'll tell you that when I first got into threat modeling, I learned about Stride. I said, "Oh, this is a really interesting way to teach people. It's helpful. It simplifies it." And then I got too cocky. Okay, I said, this is just not a good. This is just not a good kind of way of approaching it. Like, this is people aren't going to get. They're not getting this. It's too easy. It's too easy for people to understand.
Mhm.
And then what I ended up figuring out is I started trying to do something more complicated, and I couldn't. People were struggling to learn it. They weren't understanding. Like, I was making it. They didn't know where to start. They didn't know what they were supposed to be doing. And so what ended up doing is coming back around to Stride and saying, I came back. I jokingly say I had a love relationship with Stride as a methodology. I came back around to
Okay.
it because I saw there is beauty in simplifying how you teach threat modeling to people. And then once they understand the basics of it, then we can take them on. Like, they should outgrow Stride as a methodology. And that's okay. but it provides that foundational layer that helps them understand how to go to those next levels and how to do the basics. And so I would
Okay.
say stride is, and then like you mentioned, a number of other methodologies. There's attack from MITRE, there's defend from
Mm-hmm.
MITRE. So attack is like how to break stuff.
Hmm.
Defend is how to mitigate stuff. There's
Mm-hmm.
Linden that's used as a methodology from the privacy world. There's implementing attack trees. There's a lot of other ways that you can approach this, but I still come back
Mm-hmm.
to starting people off with stride and then
Mm-hmm.
letting stride kind of be the way, the guiding light that helps them build the foundation. And then once they do that, then we can move on to more complicated things.
Okay. That makes sense. That sort of gives an idea where to start from, and then as you face challenges, maybe look at other options. So another question on threat modeling is, often teams or organizations might think that it's a one-time activity. That, hey, we did it for our product X, and then we are all sorted. But ideally it should be a continuous process, right? Like as you add more and more capabilities, you should continue to do it. How should that mindset be instilled in organizations?
Yeah, so I think first of off you're right on. Threat modeling is not something that's a one-time activity. Like there is the need for what we think of as continuous threat modeling. We have
Mm-hmm.
continuous deployment, continuous delivery, continuous threat modeling. We need that as well because
Mm-hmm.
systems change, features change, new attacks, new threats come on the scene. You think about a couple of, 5 years ago, we weren't thinking about the software supply chain. It wasn't a threat.
Right.
Look where it is today. It's on everybody's mind. People are building companies to build solutions to solve your software supply chain
Exactly.
mess. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that we really do need to build that mindset into people. We need people to understand kind of how important this whole idea of threat modeling is, and being able to apply that to whatever it is that they're building.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Makes sense. I just want to pivot slightly on the threat modeling itself. So it's often, like, for the development team, it's often poorly understood, right? Because let's say you don't have a security team member or security expert. It's even more challenging for security senior leaders, let's say. And when it comes to budget, security often is the last priority, and threat modeling is considered even lower priority, and receives only a fraction of budget, right? So how should organizations deal with these challenges of, like, budget constraints when it comes to threat modeling, threat hunting, different security
Yeah,
practices?
I would say that we certainly don't have the budgetary constraints that I saw early in my career, where we were literally fighting for budget to be able to do things for
Mm-hmm.
security. I think if you go
Mm-hmm.
all the way up to the board of directors, so if let's split into a couple different sector, or let's break the world of companies into some different categories and buckets here. If we think about large enterprises that have boards of directors, they all have somebody on their board who's super serious about security. They're doing briefings about cybersecurity. Like in those type of companies, there is no stress about a cybersecurity budget. Like if you need something for security, they realize the risk profile. You think about large financials, large banks, large insurance companies. They know the value of their data, and they will invest almost anything required to protect that data. And so I
Right.
don't see the budgetary constraints from that side. Now, we
Okay.
are in the midst of a bit of an economic recession, is what people tell me. I'm not an economist, so don't buy or sell stocks based on anything I say. But so for companies we are seeing companies that are pulling back a little bit right now from a spending perspective, even in the security realm. And so, if
Mm-hmm.
you're on the other side, if you're somebody that's in one of those companies, you have to do more with less at this particular point of the world, or where the
Mm-hmm.
economy sits, where the whatever. And so, when I think about people in that situation, they're not in those large enterprises that have kind of protected budgets to be able to do things. My advice to them would be, look at things that exist inside of the OWASP world, for example. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So Software composition analysis. Okay. It's a big category. It's a tool you should be running in your pipeline to determine if you have any vulnerabilities in the packages or transitive dependencies, stuff like that. There's lots of commercial tools, but there's also a tool, an OWASP project called Dependency Check. So there is a software composition analysis tool and that OWASP puts out that you can include in your pipeline. There's other software composition analysis things you can do, like using NPM. Node Package Manager has an audit commit flag that you can run.
Right.
That costs zero. It doesn't cost you anything to add that and to use that as your way to check your packages and stuff for node vulnerabilities. I think about Ruby has there's a bundler. There's some things you can do in Ruby to get the same. Bundler audit is a tool in Ruby that will look to see if there's any known vulnerabilities. So I would say if you're in a situation budgetarily where you need to do more with less, look to some of these open source tools. These things are battle tested. It's not like this is just a tool somebody released last week and we're like, I don't know if we really want to put it in our enterprise or inside of our build pipelines. Find these tools that are very well established and that a lot of people have been using for years and incorporate them. Then all it takes is time. So for those smaller companies that maybe are facing budget pressure, look to the open source world. Maybe you're able to get some commercial tools in a few years. Use those open source tools to protect your pipelines today, because they'll get you a lot further than nothing will. If you install nothing, you're going to have a series of packages that are loaded with vulnerabilities. If you install something, and that open source tool for software composition analysis, it may not find everything. It's going to take you. It's going to get you 90% of the way there. Maybe it'll get you 100% of the way there. I'm not going to say it won't. But it'll at least get you 90% of the way there while you wait for budgets to open up further down the road.
Makes sense. So one follow-up question to that is, like as you highlighted, right, the current economy is a little shaky. So let's say if you are pitching threat modeling to your leadership, what are some of the advantages you would show so that you can get some budget?
The easiest way to explain threat modeling is in what is the value, what's the return on investment. If I find security issues during design and we adjust and mitigate them, versus if that same feature gets designed with security challenges built in and goes all the way to production, I still have to fix it. I can't just leave it in production in an insecure manner. And so the value proposition of threat modeling is it prevents or eliminates or limits, I guess I shouldn't say eliminates, but it limits rework, which is a big challenge. Rework is a developer cost where developer builds a feature, they push it to production, somebody finds a security issue, that feature gets routed back to them. That developer, not only do they have to stop what they were doing, they have to empty their brain of all the context of what they're working on, and they have to reload their brain with things that they did 3 weeks ago or whatever it was. And then they need to try to fix the problem and then move on. And so threat modeling can help you to find more of those issues up front. So it saves us in development time. It saves us in security, the time it takes to fix a security vulnerability, the time it takes to communicate a security vulnerability, because we have to communicate. If we have a nasty security vulnerability, we have to communicate it to our customers. We may have to perform incident response if we get a compromise. Like there's all of these things that we can help to make them less of a charge or less of a problem for the business by doing that threat modeling early on. And so that's how I sell it. Whenever I go in and say, when someone's like, oh, how am I, what's the benefit of this? Well, the benefit is you're going to have less security problems get to production. That's it. Like, do you want less security issues in production? Do you want to fix things? Do you want to prevent rework or limit rework? If the answer is yes, then threat modeling will provide that. It'll have a higher cost up front to teach people how to do it, but it'll return for years into the future because in less security issues.
Makes sense. So early detection and then less interrupts for your developers or the engineering team as well.
Definitely.
So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So now if we want to think about different phases of organizations, right? Let's say for an early stage startup, when they are focusing on product security, there are many areas like vulnerability SOC programs, etc. There are many, right? So, what are the some of the key areas to focus on, given like startups have limited time, people, and budget?
Yeah, so I kind of maybe even I answered this a little bit earlier, but I'll kind of reset that answer a little bit because I've started I've started a company from scratch. I've built that startup up into a big company, so I understand where a lot of startup founders are sitting. Now, I had an unfair
Mm-hmm.
advantage because I love application security. It's part of what I am and who it's who I am. It's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
But here's what I did in the from a inexpensive approach to product security. First of all,
Okay.
I perform threat modeling myself of a lot of our early designs. I threat modeled our
Okay.
architecture, but I also taught our developers how to do threat modeling. And it's a work in progress, but they were learning how to do threat modeling, how to consider what the threats are and what they're building and how to mitigate them. The other thing I did was I looked for open source static analysis, SAST, static analysis, static
Mm-hmm.
application security testing. I found open source versions of that I could include in our pipeline so that every time code got checked in, our DevOps pipeline would grab that commit and build it. Everything got built when somebody committed code. And so the static application security testing tool, the open source one, got executed on every commit. And if it threw an error, that code, we would know that code needed to be fixed before it could be merged. And so the developers got in the habit of going back. Now, I didn't pay anything for that tool. It was an open source tool, but it provided
Mm-hmm.
a checkpoint. I did the same thing with SCA, with software composition analysis. I used all the things I mentioned in that previous answer. I used
Mm-hmm.
NPM audit. I used bundler audit because it was a Ruby on Rails application. And those two things could also break the build on that commit, causing the developer to have to go back and upgrade the packages to get
Mm-hmm.
everything to pass for that commit coming in. And so there's three examples, from threat modeling, from open source SAST, open source SCA, that any company can do that. It doesn't cost any money to integrate those things. And those tools, integrating the SAST tool, integrating the SCA tool, it didn't take much effort. They're pretty out of the box as far as you don't have to go tweak them and do a lot of configuration. They're pretty much out of the box. You may get some false positives. You want to adjust policies or something, but the return on
Correct.
investment from doing those type of practices, one, it sets the stage early that we care about security. So when your customer says, Baru, what do you do about security with your startup? Oh, well, we threat model the stuff that we build. We run static application security
Mm-hmm.
testing, and we run software composition analysis. And we only 5 people work here, and this is what we do. It shows that you're thinking about security in a way that those customers, and especially larger enterprise customers, want to know you care about security. And so that's really the big pieces of this coming together are, being able to find doing threat modeling, adding these open source SAST, open source SCA, building that foundation of application security in your pipeline, but ultimately for your entire company.
So there are two takeaways, at least for me. One is the use open source. Since you have budget constraints or people constraints, try to use as much open source as you can. The second one, the more important one, is around teaching your development team to do the threat modeling. That sort of defines the culture of the organization as well, right? Like as you grow, all the developers will start doing that as part of their, let's say, design phase, which sort of helps you in future, like less interrupts or less vulnerabilities exposed and stuff like that. So I love the second part of your answer. uh, this is one question that we have to ask you. So there is a new shiny technology, right, called ChatGPT, and everyone is talking about it. In fact, Google also launched Bard to compete with ChatGPT. So now I can generate security policies using the tool and use that in my organization. So is that the magic trick to solve all of my application security problems?
Hold on one second. I'm going to ask ChatGPT. See what ChatGPT gives us as an answer here. No, I'll give you my thoughts on this. So I see, different people are approaching we're looking at ChatGPT kind of from different perspectives. Some people are looking at it saying it's gonna replace all of our people. It's gonna do all these things. I'm not in that camp. I don't see generative AI replacing anything other than the most menial of jobs. Where I see the advantage from an application security perspective is when I think about a generative AI that can provide guidance into a developer. If we can train this generative AI to have secure coding knowledge so that when a developer is coding something, there can be, I see more of like the road where AI helps all developers to be 10x developers. We always talk about 10x developers. You have to have a 10x developer or two in your startup because there's someone who generates code at 10 times the rate of everybody else, and they're just incredible. I think AI can really make lots of regular developers 10x developers because it can help them, and it can make the 10x developers go faster. The most senior developers can rely on the different kind of the different scaffolding, for example. Like a senior developer, if the AI can create the scaffolding for something they're trying to do, and then they just go,
Mm-hmm.
instead of creating the 20 lines, they create the 3 lines to um, the real special sauce or whatever that they needed to do to make that function really do what it
Right.
was intended for. So I see kind of
Mm-hmm.
AI playing in on helping to advise developers, but I think there's a security angle to getting an AI that has more training on secure coding principles and approaches and is able to advise and scaffold more of secure strategies and secure blocks of code for the developer. And so it's the developer working with the AI to really empower them to go further. Then I don't see the AI writing code at this stage that's usable. And then I think about like on
Mm-hmm.
the SOC use case. If you haven't seen yet, Microsoft has released something called Copilot.
Mm-hmm.
It's an AI that's designed for SOC analysts. And what it does is it does a lot of the legwork that a SOC analyst would do in trying to bring disparate pieces of information together, putting them in a way where you can look at various feeds and things coming from different devices, and then tie them all together, and then try to figure out what's going on. In the case of Microsoft Copilot, it can save the SOC analyst all that legwork. It can bring everything together into a single view. And then as a SOC analyst, I can say, okay, I see this, I see this. Boom, I know what it is. I know what we need to do, and we know how we need to react. Versus the SOC analyst going and spending 5 minutes looking at this one piece of information. Use it 10 minutes to find this up. Like the AI can do all that legwork for them behind the scenes so that it can 10x a SOC analyst as well. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think AI is it's definitely gonna change the landscape. It's not gonna do AppSec for you. You still got to have people that are smart, people that are driving, coming back. I'm coming back all the way around to the beginning. People, process, tools, and governance. The AI can't replace the people. It can help the people to be better. It
Mm-hmm.
can help the people to be more to 10x their abilities. From the
Mm-hmm.
process, the AI is not going to create the process for you. You got to build the process and adapt the process over time. The AI can
Mm-hmm.
help maybe with some of the tools. Like I think the tools are going to get smarter in AppSec. And then
Right.
maybe from a governance perspective, maybe AI can help on the dashboarding and tracking that data, and at least pointing out people, certain situations where people are not meeting a governance level. And so I see AI really improving all of these different areas, but it's not replacing any of the things that we do.
Yeah, so I can see, like in future architecture diagrams, there is AI as one of the layers in between all of these components, right? The governance, your tools, the processes, people, like everywhere, AI helping you get better rather than sort of we fearing that AI might take our jobs or uh, like getting into that kind of even discussion.
Yep.
So that's a great way to end the security section. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and knowledge around the area. Here are a few important points I could gather. The first one is security tools does not mean AppSec. There are many other factors to security as well, like the people, process, and governance. The second one is for resource constrained organizations, start with open source to improve security. for high impact areas before investing in expensive tools. The third one is, instead of following all the best practices listed in OWASP top 10 or security best practices, follow a data driven approach and pick high value sections for your code security, CI/CD security, or supply chain security, and other areas. So let's go to the next section, which is around rating security practices. So the way it works is, I'll share a practice and you sort of rate it 1 to 5, and maybe you add some context why you are rating it as a 1 or a 2 or 3 or a 4 or 5.
Sure.
So the first practice is training employees during the onboarding only, so that they can identify and respond to potential security threats, because there is no need to do it on a continuous manner or doing any tabletop exercises, let's say every 6 months or a year. What's your rating for that?
So I'll give that 1, which is a worst practice. And it's a worst practice
Okay.
because education needs to be continuous. Let's use developers, because that's where I spend most of my time working with developers. If I
Hmm.
teach developers for 1 week and then I turn them loose for the rest of their career inside the company and say, go make secure products and applications, there's no reinforcement of the learning that's happening there. And so
Hmm.
education, learning, transferring knowledge, this has to happen over a period of time. You can't do this in a single, because if you go into a 40-hour class, you will forget by the 6 months after that, you will forgotten almost everything that you learned there. But if you approach education and learning through things like tabletop exercises, you will have the ability to reinforce the concepts. You teach the concepts and then you reinforce the concepts, so that developers should have a security training experience every month. Top of mind. Oh, I remember we did
Hmm.
this thing and then we did this little challenge where there was a cross-site scripting. Oh, look, I just made a cross-site scripting. Crud, I got to fix this. I did what I did in that exercise. It's
Hmm.
reinforcement that makes that. It's not a single point in time. So that's why I say that one's a worse practice.
I would have been surprised if you had given anything higher than 1, honestly.
Oh, is there? I didn't
uh,
know I could go lower. Can I use negative numbers or?
no, no. So the next one is developing and regularly testing an incident response plan to help quickly detect, respond to, and recover from security incidents.
Okay, for me that's a 5, and I'll tell you why. In a period of my career, I was a director of incident response for a large web hosting company that our focus was working with customers who had
Hmm.
compromises inside of their web hosted environments. And
Hmm.
when somebody doesn't have a plan, it's just chaos. So we're going to make a plan while we're in the midst, in the fire, while things are falling apart, and we're trying to deal with the media and try to deal with the customer base and trying to deal with the executive team. We're building a plan, but we're doing it. It's costing you a
Hmm.
lot more for us to build that plan on the fly while we go. And there's a lot more chances we can make mistakes or go in different directions. And so I say that's a best practice. As I'm going to give that a 5, because I've been on the other
Okay.
side when we didn't have it. I felt the pain of not having something that was fleshed out in advance, that who we communicate
Hmm.
with, what are the steps we go through. Not having that is a very painful experience. So having it is a 5.
Makes sense. So the third one, or the last one, is security is challenging and it delays our business growth. So grant developers or security teams unrestricted access to your database or your cloud systems or applications, so that business growth is not affected at all.
I'm going to go back with a worse practice. I'm not in the. For me, it's either there's no gray areas in the middle here with me. So here's why,
Okay.
though. Here's why.
Hmm.
You can live in the world that what you just described there of having all developers have all access to everything. That works until you hit a certain size. If you have 5,000 developers and everyone has access to everything, you have to build such a robust system of traceability and tracking everything that everybody does, because somebody could go in and drop all the tables in the database. If everybody has access, everybody has admin, there's no least privilege. How do we know who did
Right.
it? Who do we know? If someone did it on purpose, they should be fired. How do we know who did it? How do we prove they did it? And so
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to build those controls from the very beginning in a startup. Like, just get people in the habit. That's why we have containerization, right? Docker containers were created to solve one central problem. Everybody forgets what it was. Developers used to build software on their local computer, and then they would
Mm-hmm.
upload that to the server, and it wouldn't work because they had libraries installed on their computer. They had other components that the application needed to run, and they didn't replicate it. They
Mm-hmm.
didn't even know to replicate those to the server environment. So I didn't invent containers. Somebody invented containers because they said, well, what if we create this thing called a container, and the developer creates the container on their local computer, and then they copy the container up to the server, and then it's the same thing running in both places. And so if it doesn't run on
Mm-hmm.
if it runs on the developer's workstation, it will run on the server because they had to put all the libraries in the container and define them. Like, so that's an
Correct.
example of something that came out of, the necessity, being able to
Mm-hmm.
solve this type of a problem there. And so that I think it just helps to kind of frame the issue.
Right, right. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. So that's a great way to end the episode. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining with us and sharing your insights. It was lovely to speak with you.
Same with you as well. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to share a tiny bit of wisdom that I may have learned along my own journey.
Yeah, I have learned quite a bit, and I'm hoping that our viewers will learn something new as part of it as well. To our viewers, if you have any questions around security, share those at scale20.com, and we'll get those answered by an expert in the security space. Thank you so much. Thanks again, Chris, for joining.